Have you ever been sitting peacefully, doing your own thing, finally enjoying a little time for yourself, and then someone suddenly walks in and says, "Hey, can you do this too?" And instantly your mood changes. The task might take 10 minutes. It might not even be difficult, but somehow you feel irritated. Not because you're incapable of doing it, not because you hate helping people. You're annoyed because nobody asked whether you wanted to take on another task. You had already decided what you were doing with your time, and suddenly someone else entered that space and assigned you something as if you were just sitting there waiting for work. And the funniest part? You might even say, "Yeah, sure, I'll do it," while your brain is screaming, "Why is this suddenly my problem?" If you've ever felt that instant wave of irritation when someone says, "Just do this too," there's actually a psychological reason behind it. What makes this reaction so interesting is that the task itself is often not the real problem. If the exact same person had asked you earlier, "Could you help me with this later?" you might have agreed without any irritation. You might even have done it happily. But when someone suddenly interrupts what you're doing and places their responsibility in your hands, your brain reacts differently. The difference isn't always the amount of work, it's the sudden loss of control over your time. Human beings have a surprisingly strong need for autonomy. We like feeling that we have some control over what we do, when we do it, and how we spend our energy. Even small decisions can give us that feeling of control. That's why sitting alone, watching something, playing a game, drinking coffee, scrolling through your phone, or simply doing absolutely nothing can feel completely different when it was your choice. The moment someone suddenly tells you what you need to do, that sense of choice disappears, and your brain notices it. That's why the phrase, "just do this too," can be much more irritating than it sounds. The word "just" makes the task sound tiny, but your brain isn't only processing the task. It's processing the interruption. It's processing the fact that your attention has been redirected. It's processing the fact that your personal time has suddenly become someone else's opportunity to get something done. And when this happens repeatedly, the frustration becomes much stronger. Think about the difference between these two situations. Someone tells you in the morning, "Later today, I need your help with something." You know about it, you mentally prepare for it, you can decide when you'll do it. Now imagine you're sitting comfortably at night, you've finished everything you needed to do, and someone suddenly says, "Oh, by the way, there's one more thing you need to take care of." The task might be exactly the same, but your emotional reaction is completely different. Why? Because in the second situation, your brain had already switched into rest mode. You had mentally closed the day. Suddenly, another demand appears. And this is where something called interruption cost comes in. Your brain doesn't switch between tasks instantly. When you're focused on something, your attention builds around it. When someone interrupts you, your mind has to stop one process and start another. Even when the new task is simple, that mental switching requires energy. That's why being interrupted repeatedly throughout the day can feel exhausting, even when none of the individual tasks were particularly difficult. But there's an even deeper reason this can create anger. Sometimes you're not actually angry about doing the task, you're angry because of what the task represents. When someone repeatedly gives you their responsibilities, your brain may interpret the pattern as, "My time is less important than yours," or "You assume I'll handle things because I'm available," or even, "You don't see what I was already doing." That interpretation can create resentment much faster than the task itself. This becomes especially strong when you are someone who usually says yes. If people know you'll probably agree, they may stop asking properly. They simply start assuming. "You can do this. You handle that. While you're at it, take care of this too." And slowly, helping stops feeling like a choice and starts feeling like an obligation. That's when even a small request can trigger a surprisingly strong emotional reaction.
There's also a psychological difference between being asked and being assigned. When someone asks, "Could you help me with this?" your brain still feels like it has a choice. You can say yes, no, or suggest another time. But when someone says, "Do this," the message feels completely different. Even if the person doesn't intend to be disrespectful, it can feel like your time has already been claimed without your permission, and people naturally resist when they feel their freedom is being taken away. Psychologists sometimes describe this reaction as psychological reactance. When people feel that their freedom to choose is being restricted, they naturally feel an urge to restore that freedom. That's why sometimes the smallest instruction can make you want to do the exact opposite. Someone says, "Don't touch that," and suddenly you want to touch it. Someone says, "You have to do this right now," and suddenly your brain becomes much more interested in doing absolutely anything else. And here's the part many people misunderstand. This doesn't automatically mean you're lazy. A person can be hardworking and still hate unexpected tasks. Someone can spend hours helping others and still become irritated when another responsibility suddenly gets thrown at them. Because the issue isn't necessarily effort, it's autonomy, it's timing, it's the feeling that someone else decided how your time should be used.
This is especially noticeable when you're finally resting. Imagine you've spent the entire day working, studying, handling responsibilities, answering messages, solving problems, and helping people. Finally, you sit down. You haven't even been resting for 5 minutes when someone says, "Can you quickly do this?" Technically, it's a small request. Emotionally, it can feel like someone just walked into the tiny piece of peace you were trying to protect. And sometimes the person asking genuinely doesn't understand why you're annoyed. From their perspective, you're sitting there. They think you're free, so what's the problem? But being physically available doesn't mean being mentally available. Someone can look like they're doing nothing while their brain is finally recovering from an exhausting day. Rest is still something you're doing even when it doesn't look productive from the outside. This is why people often become particularly irritated when they're interrupted during personal routines. Maybe you're watching your favorite show, maybe you're gaming, maybe you're having coffee, maybe you're talking to a friend, maybe you're simply lying down after a long day. These moments may look insignificant to someone else, but psychologically, they're your chosen space. When someone suddenly enters that space with a demand, it can feel much bigger than just another task. Another factor is fairness. If you constantly see someone avoiding their own responsibilities and then bringing them to you, frustration becomes almost automatic. You're not thinking, "I hate work," you're thinking, "Why am I doing your job?" That's an entirely different emotional reaction. When people perceive an unfair distribution of effort, resentment builds quickly, especially when the other person acts as if their request is completely normal. And sometimes people don't even realize they're building resentment because they keep agreeing. They say yes because saying no feels rude. They say yes because it's family. They say yes because the task is technically small. Then they complain internally, become irritated, and wonder why everyone's requests bother them so much. The problem isn't always that people ask too much. Sometimes the deeper problem is that you haven't communicated where your capacity ends. If you constantly say yes while secretly wanting to say no, other people receive the wrong information. They think you're okay with it. They don't see the frustration happening inside your head, so they continue asking. That's why healthy boundaries can completely change this pattern. A boundary doesn't have to sound aggressive. You don't have to say, "Don't ever ask me for anything again." Sometimes it's simply, "I can't do that right now," or "Give me some time and I'll see when I can get to it," or even, "I'm resting at the moment, I'll help you later." These sentences do something important psychologically. They put you back in control of your time. And notice something interesting. Once you start communicating boundaries, you may initially feel guilty. That's normal, especially if you've trained people to expect immediate help from you. When the pattern changes, everyone has to adjust, including you. The guilt doesn't necessarily mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it simply means you're doing something unfamiliar. The goal isn't to become someone who never helps. That's not healthy either. The goal is to make helping a choice instead of an automatic obligation. You should be able to help someone because you genuinely want to, not because you've become the person everyone assumes will handle their problems. Because there's a huge difference between generosity and being treated like an unlimited resource. Generosity feels meaningful when you choose it, but when people repeatedly assume access to your time, your energy, and your attention, even kindness can turn into resentment. So the next time someone suddenly says, "Just do this too," and you feel that instant irritation rising inside you, pause for a second. Ask yourself what you're actually reacting to. Is the task difficult, or did someone suddenly take control of your time? Are you angry about the work itself, or are you tired of people assuming you'll always say yes? Because sometimes your irritation isn't telling you that you're a bad person. It's telling you that a boundary has been crossed, or that you've been ignoring your own boundary for too long. And if you relate to this, remember one thing. You don't have to be available just because you're physically present. You don't have to accept every request just because it's small. And you don't have to prove you're helpful by constantly sacrificing your own time. Your time belongs to you too. So now I'm curious, what's that one sentence that instantly annoys you when someone comes and gives you another task? Is it "just do this too"? It's a quick thing? Or "you're free anyway"? Tell me in the comments. I have a feeling a lot of people are going to have the exact same answer.